After kicking Chase Rogers out of class for being disruptive, Professor Murdoch told the students that she was aware of the fight that had just broken out on campus. Kevin hoped she wasn't going to notice him, but Dalton didn't seem very worried. Professor Murdoch fixed her eyes on Kevin and Dalton and asked them, "Do you two still want to pretend it wasn't you? Do you really think it was a good idea to fight on the first day of school? Stand up right now." Kevin got up from his chair sheepishly. He didn't expect Professor Murdoch to recognize him in Dalton. Unlike Kevin, Dalton stood up very readily. The way he stood up so eagerly, it looked like Dalton thought he was going to be praised by the professor. As Professor Murdoch spoke, she slowly walked from the podium to the back row and looked Dalton in the eyes. She told the class, "Dalton Steele is the sole heir to the Steele's family fortune. When his great-grandfather came to Chicago, he had nothing. He relied on his own martial arts training and his courage to build his fortune from scratch. Over the past few years, the Steele's family businesses have spread throughout the region," she continued. "And even though he never committed any major crimes, he did pretty much whatever he wanted. However, he never did anything to stain the family name." Upon hearing this, Dalton started to wonder what the professor was getting at. He didn't understand why she seemed to know so much about his family. Then Professor Murdoch turned to Kevin and said, "You married into the Jones family. Since your marriage, you've been wasting your time hanging around the house. The strange thing is that you recently moved your parents to Chicago from their home in the country, and you even got them to move into one of the new luxury condos at the Salix Leaf Hotel complex. Isn't that so?" The other students in the class were amused by this last detail and started to laugh. How could a freeloader manage to buy a condo in a luxury building, especially the most exclusive place in the whole city? This had to be a joke. The professor was visibly irritated by their laughter. Kevin was secretly surprised to see her reaction, but he suspected that she was far more powerful than she looked. "What are you laughing at? What's so funny about what I just said? Don't you realize that Kevin probably had good reason to put himself in that situation?" Professor Murdoch said with a serious look on her face. "Don't think that you're superior to him just because you're from wealthy families. I'm not afraid to tell you that you're all a bunch of trash as far as I'm concerned." No one dared to argue with her. They had already seen the consequences of ticking her off, and nobody wanted to suffer the same fate as Chase Rogers, so they just sat there and listened. Kevin looked at Professor Murdoch in astonishment. He'd never expected this teacher to speak up for him. "Don't be so surprised. We carefully checked the backgrounds and social media accounts of every student who applied to the school. That's why I warned all of you to be more cautious in the future," Professor Murdoch explained to them in a very dignified tone. Then she looked at Kevin and Dalton coldly and scolded them. "I don't care what reason you two have for what you did, it's never right to bring your disagreements onto school property. You won't be expelled, but your punishment is to run 50 laps around the football field." What the hell did she just say? 50 laps? Can she do that? Kevin said to himself. He hoped he'd heard her wrong. "I'm not going. I won't even run 50 feet, Dalton replied curtly. He turned around and sat down without asking for Professor Murdoch's permission. "You really aren't going to run?" she asked as she glared at him. "No, I'm not going to run. I don't run from any challenge," Dalton replied confidently. As soon as his voice faded, Professor Murdoch walked over to the back of the classroom and put her fist through the brick wall without even trying. She brushed off her jacket as she turned to Dalton and asked him again, "Are you sure you wouldn't rather just go for a little run?" "Come on, Dalton. I don't think we really have a choice," Kevin whispered to his friend. Professor Murdoch was out of patience. Then she threatened them again. "What are you waiting for? Either you two go and run right now or you're out of this school." "Of course, Professor Murdoch," Kevin said agreeably as he pulled Dalton by the arm. "We're on our way." Kevin didn't want to test Professor Murdoch's patience anymore. When they got outside, they put their things down by the bleachers and started jogging around the field. "Why did you go along with her, Kevin? This is humiliating. I feel like a little kid," Dalton complained as he limped along. "We didn't have a choice. Did you see how powerful she was? And do you really want to get kicked out on the first day? You have to look at the bigger picture," Kevin explained to him. Dalton didn't say anything more. He just followed Kevin around and around the field. On the first day of school, there usually isn't much to learn. After the professors introduced themselves, they left the classroom so that the students could interact and get to know each other. After all, they would be together for the next 4 years. Blair was still feeling the effects of Dalton's slap earlier in the day. When he saw Dalton and Kevin running around the field, he got really excited. "You messed with the wrong person. It serves you right to be punished," Blair thought to himself. Then he decided to get a little revenge and shouted loudly, "Guys, come and take a look. That piece of trash is running laps on the first day of school." A lot of students turned around to see what he was talking about. They were all young adults, and it was difficult for them to return to school. Some of them were already a little bored, so when they saw that there was something interesting going on, they all lined up to watch. But Blair's plan backfired, and they started to comment to each other about how impressive it was for someone to use their spare time for training. It actually inspired them. This might have helped Kevin's reputation in the school. Even Lily and Phoebe Anderson were standing by the window watching Kevin run laps around the field, but they were thinking about completely different things. Kevin and Dalton figured that their 50 laps would add up to a little over 10 miles. Considering the shape Dalton was in just a couple of days ago, it was a miracle that he could get that far. It only took them about an hour and a half, including the time they took to stretch. The whole time they were running, their classmates were watching them. "I can't believe how tired I am," Dalton complained as he dropped to the ground when he was finished. "Well, it's a good thing you took the power pill after the restoration pill," Kevin commented. And then he added, "I was just getting warmed up. I'm surprised she only wanted us to run 10 miles. I think it was more to put us in our place than anything else." They were both in great shape to start with, but the power pill did wonders for their stamina. "What do you say we hit the showers and then go get something to eat?" Dalton suggested. He wanted a reward after that experience, and his clothes were soaked with sweat, practically sticking to his skin. "The way I'm feeling, I could just jump in the fountain in front of the administration building," Kevin joked. "Just let me lie here for a while. I don't think I can feel my legs," Dalton grumbled as he lay on the field exhausted. While they were talking, Lily walked over and smiled at the two of them. Then she offered Kevin and Dalton each a bottle of water. "That's very thoughtful of you, Lily. Just what we needed after a punishment like that," Dalton said gratefully as he took the bottle. He unscrewed the top and poured the water down his throat like he was in a drinking contest. "That sure feels good," he said with a satisfied sigh. But Kevin didn't take the bottle that Lily had offered him. In fact, he didn't even look at her. "Come on, get up. Let's go clean up and get something to eat and drink," Kevin exclaimed as he gave Dalton a friendly kick in the calf. Dalton stood up shakily. His legs still felt pretty weak, even though his tendons had almost completely healed. But he felt like a gust of wind could knock him over. He looked at Kevin and told him, "Can't you see that Lily wants to talk to you about something?" "There's nothing for us to talk about. Let's go get a drink," Kevin replied bitterly. Seeing Kevin acting like this made Lily anxious, and she tugged on his arm. "I know I was really wrong, but you can't stay mad forever. Please come home with me." "What's taking you so long, Dalton? Are we going to take a shower or not? If you go home smelling like that, Miranda will kick you out of the house," Kevin teased. He continued to ignore Lily and abruptly turned around to leave. "I'll get a drink with you another day. Looks like your wife wants you to go home with her," Dalton said considerately as he walked off the field. Kevin wanted to leave too, but Lily was hugging him. The smell of his sweat didn't really bother her, and she buried her head in his chest. "Can you please forgive me? I know I was wrong," Lily begged him. She'd spent a lot of time thinking over the past few days. Not only did she realize that she'd made a huge mistake, but she also knew that she'd let Kevin down. "Even if you don't forgive me right now, I still won't let you go," Lily sobbed. "Do you think you can stop me?" Kevin asked without changing his expression. "Even if I can't stop you, I'll still follow you. If I can't find you at school, then I'll go to Corwin Tower to wait for you. In any case, I'll follow you even to the ends of the earth," Lily cried. Kevin was considering going with her, not because he forgave her, but because if she kept pestering him like this, he'd have a hard time getting anything done. Kevin finally let out a long sigh and gave in. "Okay, I'll go with you." "Really?" Lily asked doubtfully, but she still didn't take her hand off his arm. "If you don't let go of my arm, I'll leave right now and you'll never be able to find me again," Kevin said gloomily. Lily was so frightened when she heard him say this that she quickly let go. "Come on," Kevin mumbled as he pointed to the other side of the campus where he'd parked his car. Once they got into Kevin's car, Lily told him that she and her mother had moved into a new place. They were now living in a condo at the Salix Leaf Hotel's new development. Kevin didn't say anything in reply. He just nodded unemotionally. On the way to her new home, Lily kept looking for topics to talk about, but Kevin only answered yeah and yup. After more than an hour, Kevin pulled into the parking garage under Lily's building. She'd certainly found a tasteful place, and she bought her condo at just the right time. It had already increased in value by the next day because there was such a demand for the properties in her building. Kevin looked around and saw all the amazing facilities. Plus, the architecture was exquisite and the layout was just right. He was relieved to see just how beautifully the place had turned out. He could tell that Rachel had put a lot of effort into the project, and she certainly hadn't let him down. When they got out of the car, Lily took Kevin by the arm and told him excitedly, "My place is in this tower." Then she paused before adding, "I'll make something delicious for you to eat when we get upstairs." "You can head up there first. I'd like to go and buy some gifts," Kevin suggested as he looked at the large shopping mall next to the building. "What gifts are you thinking of getting?" Lily smiled and replied, "The best gift for me would be to forgive me." "I really think I should get something for your mom," Kevin said uneasily. Dorothy already had a horrible opinion of him. How could he return home as a former jailbird? Who knew how she might react? "You really don't need to buy anything. I'll help you deal with my mom," Lily offered. She was really afraid that Kevin would change his mind and drive away. Then how could she ever find him again? "I think it would be better to buy her something. I haven't been back in a while, plus I still need to go and see my parents. I'm sure they're still worried about me," Kevin insisted. "Okay, but I'll go with you." Lily volunteered as she took him by the arm. After the disaster with Nolan Hill, she was still afraid. Now the only place she felt safe was by Kevin's side. "Let's go," Kevin exclaimed. Then he locked his car and started walking towards the shopping mall. There was a reason this development was so popular. It had absolutely everything you could want. The residents didn't need to leave the property if they didn't feel like it. Even if a shop didn't have exactly what you wanted, they could send for it and deliver it to your home for no extra charge. But before they'd gotten very far, a young woman ran over to them in a panic. She kept looking behind her and accidentally bumped into Lily. "I'm so sorry, I didn't do it on purpose," she hurriedly apologized. "No problem, just be a little more careful," Lily replied considerately. But Kevin had a bad feeling and asked her, "Is there something wrong?" He could tell that she was a university student, and he could see that she was in a hurry. But what worried him was that her eyes were filled with panic. When Kevin and Lily arrived at her building's parking garage, they decided to go to the mall first and buy a gift for Dorothy. On the way to the mall entrance, a young woman bumped into Lily because she was looking behind her fearfully while she was walking. Kevin asked her if something was wrong. Kevin didn't always meddle in other people's business, but after all, the Salix Leaf Hotel's vast complex was partly his responsibility. He'd personally put Rachel in charge of it, and if something bad happened here, it was very likely that it would fall back on him sooner or later. That's why Kevin decided to ask the woman if she needed any help. No, the woman replied hesitantly, but Kevin could see in her eyes that something wasn't right. "Really?" Kevin asked with a slight frown. The more he looked at the young woman, the more he felt that she needed help. "Since she said it was nothing, Kevin, don't force her." Lily couldn't help but try to persuade him. She felt that Kevin had a lot of good qualities, but she didn't understand why he was putting his nose in someone else's business. Just as the woman was about to answer Kevin, a man and a woman suddenly ran over to them in a hurry. They both seemed to be about the same age as she was. "What are you running for, Melody? Couldn't you tell I was just joking? Did you have to run so far?" the man asked her while trying to catch his breath. He was dressed in very expensive clothing, but nothing seemed to match. He looked like Gucci, Ralph Lauren, and Armani had all thrown up on him. The woman who was with him said, "Mr. Collins chose you from all the others he could have had. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth." I didn't, Melody replied feebly.
Didn't you come here today to take a look at the layout of one of the condos? The man continued. As I explained to you, my sister is the general manager of this complex. If you have fun playing with me tonight, I'll give you an apartment.
You're Rachel's brother? Kevin asked in disbelief. Lily got a strange look on her face. She and Kevin never knew that Rachel had a brother who was a bully.
Who do you think you are to bring my sister's name into this? The man sneered as he looked Kevin up and down.
Just then, the man's companion suddenly exclaimed, I think I understand. Melody, are you afraid of becoming Riley's mistress? Melody looked at Kevin and said desperately, No. Cindy, that's nonsense. I just accidentally bumped into this lady. Oh, so you bumped into her. Do you expect anyone to believe what you just said? Cindy spat back. You really are useless, aren't you? Have you been living in the country for so long that you don't know how things work in the big city? Just look at this man, Cindy continued as she gestured to Kevin. How can you compare this guy to Riley? But I guess it makes sense. Only someone from the middle of nowhere would be interested in some poor slob like this. Then she took the man by the arm and sneered. Riley, I feel sorry for you. Look at what kind of tramp you're interested in. The first chance she got, she ran to this jerk. Now she's acting all innocent. Are you done talking? Kevin growled. He couldn't take it anymore, and he got more upset because he saw that Melody was about to cry. Lily didn't look so good either. She really couldn't understand why these people were being so mean to each other.
Shut up, the man scolded him. How can you come in here dressed like that and then talk back to me?
Then he sneered.
Just look at you. I'll bet you couldn't even afford to buy a toilet in this place.
He spat on the ground and threatened.
You shouldn't even be in here. I'm calling security to have you thrown out so I don't have to look at you anymore.
I can't believe how arrogant you are. Aren't you afraid of karma? Kevin asked coldly. The guy had no idea who he was dealing with.
Why don't you mind your own business? If you know what's good for you, you'll get out of here right now. Otherwise, you may find yourself with a couple of broken legs, the man threatened.
I'm not really afraid of your empty threats. Why don't you go ahead and break my legs? Kevin answered back. He didn't want to waste any more time with this guy. Then he turned around and said to Lily, Call Rachel right away. Tell her that I need her to drop whatever she's doing and come down here. Lily didn't waste a second. She couldn't bear to watch this man bullying everyone. She was also glad to see that Kevin had asked her to do something for him, which meant he probably wasn't angry with her anymore. Lily quickly took out her phone and called Rachel. She gave her Kevin's message word for word.
You're just yanking my chain. How could you possibly know my sister? The man said disdainfully.
Melody, don't let this guy fool you. Just ask him if he knows who Riley's sister is, Cindy scoffed. The manager of the Salix Leaf Hotel is the most powerful woman in Chicago. Do you really think they know each other? The man pulled out his phone and called Rachel too.
I'll get someone to break your legs right now. Let's see if you can still act cool when that happens. Rachel, someone's bullying me down in the main garage. Send a few of your people to help me deal with him, he shouted into his phone. When she heard this, Melody felt guilty but was also deeply moved. She didn't expect Kevin to help her this much. After all, they just met by chance. At the same time, Melody also knew that if it wasn't for her, Kevin wouldn't be in this humiliating situation. So she decided to do something to keep him from being harmed. Riley, that's enough. I'll do whatever you want, but you have to promise to let this man and his wife leave here safely, she said tearfully. Oh, so you agree now, Riley blurted out mockingly. Well, it's too late. I'm not interested in you anymore. I just want to have this guy's legs broken.
Kevin didn't wait for Melody to reply. He reached out and pulled her behind him as he sized up the situation. So you're Riley Collins? Kevin asked ominously.
What's it with you?
Riley roared angrily.
Just look at you in your crappy clothes. What did you think you were going to do with this college student anyway? How about if I teach you a lesson?
Just as Riley finished speaking, a Mercedes S550 limousine pulled up next to them, and Rachel hurriedly got out of the car.
"How did you get here so quickly, Rachel?" Riley said excitedly. He pointed at Kevin and shouted, "This scumbag has been bullying me. I want you to have him thrown off the property."
Melody got very upset when she saw Rachel. She thought she was going to be in serious trouble, and based on how Kevin was dressed, she figured they were both in the same boat. People like them shouldn't provoke someone of Rachel's stature. But to her great surprise, Rachel didn't even look at Riley as she ran up to Kevin and nervously called him boss. Actually, when Rachel got the calls from Lily and Riley, she was showing some condos to a new client. When she realized what was going on, she immediately dropped everything and rushed over. Riley couldn't believe his eyes.
"Rachel, what are you doing? Why are you being so polite to this hillbilly?"
Riley asked his sister as he walked over to her. He thought she had mistaken him for someone else. Suddenly, Rachel slapped her brother in the face. Then she scolded him. "What the hell's wrong with you? If he's a hillbilly, what do you think that makes you?" Melody and Cindy were stunned when they heard her say that. But Riley was even more surprised at what his sister had just said. "I'll deal with you later," Rachel said to her brother as she gave him a dirty look. Then she quickly turned around to apologize to Kevin sincerely. "I'm sorry, boss. My family has always spoiled him. He had no idea who you were, so I hope you can forgive him." Rachel was incredibly anxious. She'd heard that Kevin had been arrested at the Salix Leaf Hotel for beating someone up, but she hadn't looked into it any further. Then when Dalton Steele was attacked while trying to protect Lily as she ate dinner there, she hadn't told Kevin about that either. So Rachel knew that Kevin had to be pretty angry with her, and she was afraid that he'd turn that anger on her brother. If that happened, it certainly wouldn't end well for Riley. She'd been enjoying hobnobbing with Chicago's upper crust, and it was all because of Kevin's support. And if Kevin had helped her into this high position, he could also take her right back down. "Forgive him? You've got to be kidding. Your brother just said that he wanted to find someone to break my leg," Kevin informed her. Rachel couldn't help shaking her head when she heard that. "Don't joke with me, boss. My brother wouldn't dare lay a finger on you." "You can ask Lily if you don't believe me," Kevin replied candidly. Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. She gritted her teeth as she turned around and grabbed Riley's ear. "Hurry up and apologize to Kevin. If you don't beg for his forgiveness right now, you'll never be able to step foot into the family home again for the rest of your life." Rachel was absolutely livid because of her younger brother's behavior. She knew that their parents had always spoiled him. He was a troublemaker in school and never did his assignments on time. He always kept getting involved with friends who just wanted to use him for his connections so they could climb the social ladder. Now that she was doing so well, Rachel thought she could help support her family. Since Riley was younger than her and had just finished college, she hoped to find a company where he could work for a couple of years to get some experience. That could help turn things around for him. But here he was actually starting a fight with Kevin over nothing. This could ruin their family. On top of that, she knew what had happened to Nolan Hill when he pissed Kevin off.
"I'm very sorry, sir. It was all my fault. Please forgive me." Riley apologized to Kevin very sincerely. Riley Collins may have been a playboy, but he wasn't obtuse. He could see how afraid his sister was of Kevin, so he figured it was better to not find himself on his bad side. If his sister called Kevin boss, then he'd better call him sir. Melody and Cindy were in utter amazement as they watched the whole scene play out. They had no idea why Rachel was being so respectful toward Kevin. Both of them had already realized that this ordinary-looking man who looked like he couldn't even afford to pay for parking was the real CEO of the Salix Leaf Hotel. "That's quite a change from what you were saying to me before," Kevin smirked. "Didn't you just say you wanted to have my legs broken?" "Please accept my apology. I shouldn't have talked to you the way I did, and I know I was wrong to do it," Riley begged him. He seemed to be on the verge of tears. Kevin didn't say anything. He just scowled and stared at him as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. Rachel regained her composure and walked over to Kevin. She carefully asked him, "What do you think we should do about this, boss?" Rachel really wanted to ask Kevin if he'd calm down, but that would have been ridiculous. The smile on his face made her very unsure about how he was going to respond.
He's your brother. What do you think we should do with him? Kevin asked as he glanced at Rachel. Not only did he insult me, but he also insulted this young lady behind me. Rachel didn't understand what Kevin meant. She immediately walked over to Melody and apologized to her. Hi, I'm Riley's older sister. If he's offended you in any way, I hope you can accept my apologies. Can you forgive him? Melody stammered. She really didn't know what to say. In fact, she never thought that someone like Rachel would actually apologize to her. Seeing Melody's reaction, Rachel walked over to her brother and kicked him in the shin. What are you standing there for? Hurry up and apologize. Do you want me to do everything for you? Riley didn't argue with her at all. He limped over to Melody and said, I'm sorry. But would this be enough to satisfy Kevin? Riley and Lily each called Rachel to come down to the parking garage to settle Riley's argument with Kevin. When she got there, Rachel immediately told Kevin she was sorry for her brother's behavior and then made him apologize to both Kevin and Melody. Seeing how frightened Riley looked, Melody was speechless for a moment. The two of them had been college classmates in Chicago. Back in school, Riley bullied her a lot because she was from a small farming town outside the city. But Melody was extremely kind-hearted, so she didn't really hate him for this. Melody looked at Kevin and tried to figure him out. She realized that this unassuming young man in shabby clothes was actually incredibly powerful, and Riley's fate was now in his hands. Forgive him? Kevin asked as though he didn't comprehend. Of course he understood what Melody meant. Actually, he didn't do anything wrong. Please, let him off the hook, Melody replied. She was obviously very good-natured. Oh, all right, Kevin said with a smirk as he gave Riley a strong slap on the back. But from now on, you'd better behave yourself. Don't embarrass your sister anymore. Now get lost. In fact, Kevin didn't want Riley to be punished too hard. He was just a spoiled brat. It wasn't worth it for Kevin to get angry. Besides, he was Rachel's younger brother, so he was willing to cut the guy some slack.
Thank you, sir.
Riley answered him as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. He felt like he'd just gotten a reprieve from the governor. He straightened out his clothes as he walked away with Cindy. When the two of them were out of earshot, Cindy whispered to him, Are you okay, Riley? Now what are we going to do to have some fun?
You're on your own, and don't bother calling me again, he barked at her. Then he walked away, leaving her wondering what had just happened. He was really angry with Cindy. It had actually been her idea to go after Melody, and look how that had turned out. Not only had he been taught a lesson, but he'd almost gotten his sister Rachel in big trouble with her boss. Rachel let out a long sigh and wondered what to do next. It was a good thing that Kevin wasn't upset with her, or else things wouldn't have turned out so well. Go on back to work. Don't worry about me and Lily. We'll be okay, Kevin replied as he gave Rachel a glance that wasn't quite as friendly as usual. Thank you, boss, Rachel quickly answered. I'll head back up to my office. Enjoy your walk. Kevin turned around and smiled at Melody. Everything's okay now. We'll be on our way. Then he and Lily headed to the shopping mall. When Kevin had gotten a little farther away, Melody finally came back to her senses and shouted loudly, Hey, what's your name? My name is Kevin. Kevin Williams, he answered casually without even turning his head. After about half an hour, Kevin found a nice gift for his mother-in-law. Then he went up to his parents' apartment to visit with them. He let them know he was doing okay and chatted with them for a while. After they said their goodbyes, he followed Lily back to her new place. As soon as Kevin walked in the door, Dorothy got in his face and started scolding him. What are you doing back here, you good-for-nothing? I thought you were still in jail. What did you do to get out so fast? She took a breath and continued to berate him. You're like a piece of gum on my shoe. I can't seem to get rid of you. Can't you see that Lily and I have already moved? You're not welcome here. Kevin was already used to being treated like this, so it just rolled off his back. Lily tried to calm her mother down and pleaded with her. Mom, please don't talk about Kevin like that anymore. I was the one who found him and asked him to come back home with me. She was really afraid. It hadn't been easy for her to beg Kevin to agree to come back with her. What would happen if her mother made him leave again?
What did you just say? I must not have heard you right, Dorothy said in disbelief. Are you sick or something? Mom, I'm very clear-headed now. Don't forget that Kevin is my husband. Now that he's been released, of course I'll take him back. Lily answered her mother very naturally. What did I ever do to deserve such an unreasonable daughter? Just look at this freeloader. Is he that pleasing to you? Do you think he's some kind of treasure? Dorothy shrieked louder and louder. Kevin scratched his head awkwardly and made a peace offering. Mom, I brought you something. But Dorothy interrupted Kevin before he could finish what he was saying. She was so angry that her upper lip was quivering. I don't want anything from you. Get out of here this instant and don't ever show your face here again. And you, she turned to Lily and squawked, I want you to go and get your divorce papers tomorrow. From now on, this bum won't be allowed to step foot in my house. Mom, what are you talking about? How could I ever divorce Kevin? Lily answered quickly, even before her husband could speak. Lily, are you on drugs or something? Dorothy shouted as she tried to catch her breath. Just open your eyes and take a good look at him. What does he have that's so special? Didn't you tell me that Nolan Hill was a good catch? You went out to dinner with him, but what happened then? He's got to be better than this deadbeat. When she heard Dorothy mention Nolan Hill, Lily got really nervous. She looked over at Kevin to see how he would react. When she saw that he wasn't upset, she said, Mom, can you please not mention Nolan Hill? He means nothing to me. Dorothy didn't know anything about what had happened with Nolan. All she knew was that he'd sent Lily a lot of gifts. But she had no idea what happened after dinner with him, either the fight with Dalton or the one with Kevin. Lily had never mentioned any of it to her because she didn't want her mother to worry. So as far as Dorothy knew, Nolan was a great guy and a fine catch for her daughter. Lily sighed and decided to let Kevin have a seat before she explained everything to her mother. Who told you that you could sit down? Dorothy snapped at him. Kevin didn't answer her question. All he could do was let out a sigh as she continued to rant and rave. Can't you hear me? I'm talking to you. Dorothy complained when she saw that Kevin was ignoring her questions. Come with me, Mom, Lily said as she grabbed Dorothy's hand and took her upstairs. Kevin sat patiently on the sofa and looked around the room. He had to admit that the place looked really nice. It was definitely worth the price. After about 10 minutes, Kevin got up and walked into the kitchen. He figured that as long as he had gotten back together with Lily, his anger would eventually fade away. And if the two of them were going to live together again, he should be a little more disciplined and do some of the cooking. He didn't want Dorothy to have anything to complain about. As he looked around the kitchen, he noticed a very nice porcelain mixing bowl. This would be much better for making herbal pills than cookies. It's big enough to make a huge batch, Kevin thought to himself. He opened the refrigerator door and took a look inside. The rest of the kitchen was well appointed too. Everything was Sub-Zero and Viking. Not bad. Once he'd had a good look around, Kevin took out the secret guide that the director had given him to prepare for his mission at the school. There were a lot of very talented people at the school for the healing arts. Because Kevin had absolutely no experience in undercover work, he was afraid that he might be discovered before he had a chance to carry out his plan, and it would be very difficult to escape from such skilled people. So Kevin figured it was time to put some more effort into his preparation for his mission. After reading the first few paragraphs, Kevin got very interested in what he found in the book. He started reading it aloud. Robbery is a question of good versus evil. Some people only care about themselves, so their evil deeds don't end well. Others think they're robbing the rich to give to the poor to bring justice to the world. What's this about? Aren't they just thieves? This book makes it all sound too simple, Kevin thought to himself. But the more he read, the more shocked he became. The book discussed theft as something carried out by both individuals and gangs. It also explained specific types of crimes. The tools mentioned in the guide ranged from blades to tweezers, but what they recommended was not using any mechanical devices at all. According to the book, your body was the best tool you could use. For example, you could simply use your fingers with a light touch. Kevin wondered if that's what pickpockets did. Other tips in the book sounded more like a magician's sleight of hand. Kevin had mixed emotions about what he was reading. He wondered what kind of people had written the book. After a while, he decided to go through the cabinets and whip up a meal for Lily and her mother. Luckily, the place was well stocked. When Dorothy and Lily came back downstairs again, Kevin enthusiastically brought out the meal that he'd prepared for them. Although Kevin didn't know what the two of them had been talking about, he could see that Dorothy looked a lot better now. After they finished eating, they went back to their rooms. The next morning, Lily patted Kevin gently on the cheek and cooed. "You really should get up soon. Otherwise, we'll be late for class." When he heard the word late, Kevin leapt out of bed, startling Lily. "Quick, put on your makeup," he exclaimed. "I'll go wash my face and brush my teeth right away." While Kevin was saying this, he quickly put on his clothes and rushed to the bathroom. He was deathly afraid of disappointing Professor Murdoch. He'd already run laps on his first day of school. If he was late today, who knew what kind of punishment he'd get? "Your breakfast is on the table. Go ahead and eat it while I put on my makeup," Lily declared as she picked up her mascara. Kevin almost swallowed his toothpaste when he heard her. He and Lily had been married for a long time, but this was the first time he remembered her having such a pleasant attitude. Sometimes Lily had been a little frosty with him, but now she'd suddenly become more gentle, and he wasn't used to it. They lucked out and didn't hit much heavy traffic on the way to campus. Kevin stepped into the classroom just before the bell rang. "Hey, why isn't Dalton here yet? Did he oversleep?" Kevin wondered as he headed to his seat. Professor Murdoch walked in with all her teaching materials and settled in at the podium. She was scheduled to teach them for the entire day, and the first topic was human anatomy. Because they were studying the preparation of medicinal herbs, she focused on the digestive system and the immune system. The professor tried to show how everything was affected by the natural remedies that they would learn about. Although her lecture was very serious and vivid, a lot of students weren't listening very attentively. Some of them just thought it would be fun to go back to school and hang out, and they weren't really interested in studying. Kevin checked to see if anyone was looking and sneaked his phone out of his pocket. He held it under his desk and lowered his eyes to see the screen so he could send Dalton a text to find out why he wasn't in class. The reply came back really fast. "This is Miranda. Kevin, come over here if you can. Dalton's back in the hospital." Kevin was shocked and wondered how this could have happened. Has Nolan's family done this? He had a lot of questions, and he sent a quick text to Miranda that just said, "How?" "It was Dominic and Gwen Archer," Miranda answered simply. What Kevin didn't know was that the Archers had always been jealous of Dalton's family. After the incident with his bar and the attempt to kidnap Miranda, they'd never reconciled. When Dominic found out that Dalton was going to study at the School for Healing Arts, he knew he had to strike first. He grabbed his men and headed to the Steele family's bar. Miranda and Norman happened to be there for some urgent business. Miranda stood up to him, but Dominic was intent on abducting her so he could force Dalton to hand over the bar to him. Of course, Norman wasn't going to stand for this, and a fight broke out. Ever since Dominic had taken Kevin's power pill, he'd made enormous physical progress. Norman had also made a lot of progress after taking his pill, but he was pretty old. So even though he managed to defeat Dominic, he ended up getting injured in the battle. Dalton had been on campus with Kevin when all of this happened. After he got home, he saw that his grandfather was injured and his temper flared. He grabbed all the men he had and rushed over to the Archer's family mansion. Unfortunately, Dominic had set a trap for Dalton. After a fierce battle, Dalton had some nasty flesh wounds and his men were also injured. Fortunately, they were all very tough, and there were no fatalities. Kevin was despondent when he read Miranda's text. He immediately sent Gwen Archer a message and asked her, "How the hell could you do that to the Steele family?" Before he could read her reply, a lithe hand suddenly reached down and snatched Kevin's phone away. Kevin jumped up from his chair and was face to face with Professor Murdoch. He saw her stern expression. He knew he was in big trouble. "Professor, what's going on?" Kevin pretended to be confused. "Gotcha!" Professor Murdoch sneered. This was even worse than the first day of class. Kevin knew that he shouldn't be texting in class, but his friend Dalton was in the hospital again after being beaten by Dominic Archer's men. Just as he was texting Dominic's sister Gwen Archer, Kevin was surprised to see a hand snatch away his phone. It was Professor Murdoch. "Gotcha!" she exclaimed. She didn't say it loudly, but everyone in the classroom could hear her as clear as a bell. "What crappy luck to get caught sitting in the last row playing with his phone," one of the students whispered to another. They'd already seen him running laps yesterday, and now they were wondering what would happen. When Kevin heard everyone whispering, instead of feeling ashamed, he just smiled. "Professor Murdoch, it's not what you think. I was just taking a look." Kevin even reached out his hand to take his phone back. "You want to take your phone back after I've confiscated it? It won't be that easy," she replied sternly. "I just don't understand you, Kevin. Your classmates aren't listening to the lecture because they're from rich families and can get herbal meds without working for them. But why aren't you paying attention? Didn't you learn anything from yesterday's punishment?" Professor Murdoch continued. "You have a great opportunity here. Don't you understand that? Do you really want to be a laughingstock for the rest of your life? Think about it." After she said that, the professor took Kevin's phone and walked back to the podium. "There was a lot less pressure when I was just hanging around the house," Kevin muttered to himself as he watched her walk away. The other students had been taking various herbal meds, so they had excellent hearing. There was some laughter in the room when they heard Kevin's complaint. Professor Murdoch naturally heard Kevin too, and she spun around to stare at him. "I'm disappointed in you, Kevin," Professor Murdoch said angrily. "Since you're acting like a kindergartner, I'm going to treat you like one. Move your desk over to the corner for the rest of the day. You can't move until I say so." This was very upsetting for Kevin. He'd gotten off to a really bad start with Professor Murdoch, and it just kept getting worse. "After I steal the consolidation formula, I won't be coming back to this crappy place," Kevin thought to himself, but he didn't say it out loud this time. The professor tossed Kevin's phone onto the table, and then she had an idea. "I think it's time for us to choose a student leader. This is a very important position because the student leader has duties outside the classroom," she continued, "like supervising everyone's progress and handing out assignments to everyone." The students got very excited because this would give them a chance to get closer to Professor Murdoch and Brownnoser. If you did a good job, who knows where this opportunity could lead? Plus, what was really important for these rich, privileged young people was that it would give them some power. A lot of them enthusiastically raised their hands to volunteer for the position. But Professor Murdoch stopped them and explained, "In the interest of fairness, tomorrow's election will be anonymous. Just remember that you can't vote for yourself, so I expect you to use the honor system." When the lesson was finally over, Kevin was still sitting in the corner in a very bad mood. This definitely wouldn't help his reputation on campus. "Well, that was humiliating," Kevin said to himself as he got up from his seat. "Kevin, you can go back to your regular seat now. However, there's something I want to talk to you about," the professor instructed him without even looking up from her notes. What now? How could there possibly be anything to talk about? Kevin thought as he looked at Professor Murdoch in disbelief. She motioned for the class to be quiet while she spoke. "Please be patient. This will only take a couple of minutes." She paused for a moment. "As long as you're all going to be in the same class, I think you should get to know each other socially. So I've decided to treat you to dinner." As soon as she finished speaking, one of the students stood up to address the class. It was Michael Tripp, a young stud from Detroit. "We couldn't possibly let you treat us, Professor. After all, you're about to teach us the deepest secrets of herbal medicine. The least we can do is to invite you to dinner," he announced. "In fact, I'll treat the whole class to dinner, in your honor," Mike said with a broad smile. It sounded like a sincere invitation, but Mike wasn't just trying to butter up the professor. He was also trying to buy votes for the election. He really wanted to be the student leader. "But I couldn't possibly let you do something like that," Professor Murdoch replied warily. "It's no big deal, Professor. Just think of it as me treating you to dinner and taking along a few friends. Mike explained. He was really laying it on thick. Just then, 2 other students stood up.
Professor Murdoch, I think Mike's right,
Luther Holmes said loudly. I agree. It would be great for all of us to unwind and get to know you, Lionel Chandler chimed in. He was a good brown-noser too. These 2 guys weren't very rich, but they were both very smart. After only 2 days of classes, they'd made friends with Mike Tripp. By supporting him now, they might be rewarded later on. The whole class got very excited as everyone discussed what they should do. One of them pointed out that it was a great chance for the faculty and students to get to know each other. They did their best to convince Professor Murdoch to accept Mike's offer. Seeing that most of his classmates wanted to go, Mike broke into a smile. He turned around and very politely said, Professor Murdoch, the class really wants to go with this plan. Why don't you join us? She thought for a moment and then nodded in agreement. Okay, I will. Faculty members weren't allowed to accept gifts or see students privately, but since the whole class was going, she wouldn't be accused of favoritism. It was really no big deal to just have a meal with them. What Professor Murdoch was interested in was observing the students during the dinner so that she could have some insight into their personalities. This would make it easier for her to handle the class over the next couple of years.
Great! Since Professor Murdoch is on board, I'll get someone to make all the arrangements for transportation. We're all going to the Whistler Hotel this evening,
Mike said happily. Although the Salix Leaf Hotel was now the most exclusive place in Chicago, it was by far the most expensive venue to have a meal, especially with such a large group. But the problem was that Mike really couldn't afford to invite so many people to the hotel's restaurant for dinner. The Whistler Hotel was definitely more in his budget. On top of that, the Whistler Hotel's restaurant still had a fine reputation. In some ways, it was even better than the Salix Leaf Hotel. Many of the students in the class took public transportation. Even though they were all from wealthy families, it was a lot more convenient with all the traffic jams in Chicago. If it wasn't construction, it was snow or an accident. But a little more than half of the students still drove to school by themselves, and there were others who got rides to and from campus every day. But for an occasion like this, a small number of students would have to ask for rides to get to the hotel for dinner. As they were all heading out of the building, Mike suddenly asked,
Hey, Kevin, why don't you take a taxi to the hotel?
Why would I do that? Kevin asked him in surprise.
I'm just going by how you're dressed. I'm pretty sure nobody will let you in their car looking like that,
Mike said with a snobby smile. He'd just come up with a plan. If he could put Kevin down, it might make an impression on his classmates. It would be a win-win to turn them against Kevin and also treat the class to dinner. Mike's absolutely right, Lionel agreed. Kevin, Professor Murdoch really took it easy on you today. That's why you're being allowed to come along to tonight's dinner. Don't put any of your classmates in an embarrassing position. Just take a taxi. If you don't have enough money on you for a cab or to call for a ride on an app, I'll give you a few bucks to cover you. How about $20? Then he pulled some cash out of his pocket and offered it to Kevin. Everyone around them laughed when they saw him do this. They really thought Kevin was pathetic. Kevin frowned as he looked at the money in Lionel's hand. He wondered what the heck was wrong with these guys. Aren't you overwhelmed by my generosity? Lionel grinned as he patted Kevin on the shoulder. There's no need to thank me. After all, we're classmates. Did I tell you I needed a ride? Kevin replied very coolly.
What do you mean? Don't tell me you drove here,
Mike sneered. You really drove here, Kevin? Quick, show everyone what kind of ride you have. Is it an electric scooter or a bicycle? Lionel mocked him. The other students around them were really interested in seeing what kind of car Kevin had. I'll bet he doesn't even have a license, one of them commented. Considering his reputation, they expected him to be driving an old minivan or some other kind of beater.
Look, Kevin, everyone's interested in seeing your car. Why don't you just show it to everyone?
Mike sneered while he continued to mock him. Before Kevin could answer, Professor Murdoch stood up for him and warned them. Don't bully Kevin anymore. This outing is supposed to be fun. Although Professor Murdoch could be very strict, she treated her students with respect. So when she saw Kevin being bullied, she naturally couldn't just stand there and do nothing. "Kevin, why don't you ride with me?" Professor Murdoch offered calmly.
"How could you do that, Professor? Kevin's clothes are so shabby. He might get your seats dirty," Mike pointed out.
He didn't want to give anyone a chance to be alone with Professor Murdoch right now, at least until after the student leader election tomorrow. "That's okay. If my car gets dirty, I'll take it to a car wash," Professor Murdoch answered casually. She didn't seem to mind at all. "Thank you for your kind offer, Professor Murdoch, but I really did drive to school today," Kevin told her. Professor Murdoch made a slight frown. She really didn't know what Kevin was thinking. Couldn't he tell that she was trying to give him a way out of this embarrassing situation?
"Did everyone hear that? Kevin said that he really drove here," Mike said loudly. "Let's all go take a look at his car."
Everyone laughed when they heard this, and then they went along with Mike. They didn't mind showing up a little late for dinner as long as they could have some fun at Kevin's expense.
"Lead the way, Kevin. Where'd you park your whip?" Mike said in a very arrogant tone of voice.
Kevin turned around and walked towards his car without saying another word. The group of students followed along behind him. They wanted to see how this useless good-for-nothing would make a fool of himself this time. A few minutes later, Mike looked at the Pagani in front of him in utter disbelief and asked Kevin,
"This is your car?"
"Yeah, it's a little more comfortable than my scooter," Kevin replied with a slight grin. When the others heard this, their jaws dropped. They all knew that this was a brand new Pagani Roadster. It was worth at least $3 million, if you could even find one for sale. Suddenly, Professor Murdoch glanced at Kevin with a look of appreciation in her eyes.
"Did you rent this with your wife's money?"
Mike asked him. Then he continued to bully him.
"Kevin, I'm sure your wife works very hard. It isn't right for you to spend her money like this outside."
"You know, you could probably rent one yourself," Kevin interrupted him. Mike didn't know how to respond to Kevin's wisecrack. Like everyone else, he really wanted a Pagani. Even a rental would be good for showing off. But the problem was he had no idea where he could rent one. "Please, have a seat, Professor. You must be tired after a long day of teaching," Kevin offered as he opened the door and invited her to get in. Then, while he ignored Mike and the others, he walked around and got behind the wheel. As it turned out, Professor Murdoch had something to say to Kevin, so she accepted his offer and strapped herself into the passenger seat. Mike clenched his fist and grunted. He took his friends Lionel and Luther and headed to his car. Kevin was nervous to be alone with Professor Murdoch, but this might give him a chance to clear the air. Mike and the other students were mocking Kevin mercilessly because they thought he was poor. They asked to see his car, figuring that they could make fun of that too. When they saw his Pagani Roadster, they all clammed up immediately. Kevin asked Professor Murdoch if she wanted to ride with him to the class dinner at the Whistler Hotel, and she agreed and accepted his offer. On the way to the hotel restaurant, Kevin glanced over at his teacher a few times. Professor Murdoch had a very strict classroom manner, but it seemed to Kevin that she could also be very understanding and personable. She suddenly turned to Kevin and asked him, "Tell me honestly, is this your wife's car?" "You don't really believe what Mike said, do you?" Kevin replied helplessly. "Isn't it possible for me to have my own car? It's not that I'm biased, but this car..." Professor Murdoch suddenly let out a sigh before she continued. "Forget about the car. There's something else I wanted to talk to you about." "Please, just say it. You won't hurt my feelings," Kevin exclaimed as he watched the road. "Just look at what happened in the parking lot. Your classmates were all looking down on you because they thought you didn't have a car. It seems that you invite this kind of ridicule," she said bluntly. "If you're too embarrassed to take anything from your wife, then you really should jump at this opportunity," Professor Murdoch told him earnestly. "The School for the Healing Arts is the greatest opportunity in your life. Just work hard and focus. If you have any questions, you can always come to me. This is your chance to make a name for yourself." "I understand what you're saying, Professor. I'll definitely work harder from now on," he replied. Kevin stopped at a crosswalk and said to her very sincerely, "But could you please give me my phone back first? I promise I won't take it out during class." "Haven't you been listening to me?" she snapped at him. "If you want your phone back, you'll have to earn it." Then she added, "You can go now. The light turned green." Kevin was perplexed. Did he have to wait until she was in a better mood? The entire Williams family was waiting patiently in the main room of their mansion in New York. They all looked very serious. Randall Williams had ordered them all to be there for an emergency meeting. Anyone who was late would immediately be expelled from the family. This was the first time something like this had ever happened in the Williams family. He must have had something urgent to announce. After a little while, Grandpa Williams walked into the room with Thomas by his side. He sat down in his armchair and looked at everyone gravely. "I called everyone here today to discuss an important matter. Kevin brought Dalton Steele here and caused us a great deal of trouble. But that made me think, if our family wants to continue to progress, we can't rest on our laurels. Sooner or later, we'll be eaten alive by the competition," he stated grimly. "That's why I've decided that we all need to work on ourselves, not only with training, but with the help of advanced herbal medication. It's the only way we can survive," he explained in a serious tone of voice. They were all excited to hear him say this. Everyone was aware of the fantastic things that some people had been doing with these secret concoctions, but right now none of them had the skills to compete with them. "Are you serious, Dad?" Laura was the first one to jump up and ask her father-in-law excitedly. She wasn't really into all the aspects of the topic, but she'd heard that it could promise eternal youth. Who wouldn't be interested in that? Grandpa nodded yes. "We have to keep up with the times. But there's one thing that all of you must remember. If anyone dares to leak a word of this, I'll show them no mercy," he explained to them. "It's the price we have to pay to become stronger, and to achieve our goals, we're going to join the Myriads." The entire room got so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone knew that there were a total of 3 major underground groups that you had to steer clear of. One of them was the Myriads, and the other was the Alliance. As for the third one, hardly anyone knew anything about them. Even the Williams family didn't know who they were. "Grandpa, please be careful. The Myriads are a pretty nasty bunch. Do you really want us to join them?" one of them asked. A lot of them had their doubts about this plan. Didn't it go against the family's values? Grandpa Williams let out a long sigh and admitted, "You're right. I also realized that this probably isn't a wise decision. But we really have no choice. If our family wants to survive, we have to train ourselves. This is the only path we can take." Laura stepped in front of her relatives and scolded them. "You should be listening to Grandpa. Have you forgotten who's in charge here?" She was desperate for the chance to have access to herbal meds that could keep her looking young for the rest of her life. "Laura's right. We have to present a unified front and support my father," Thomas told them solemnly. "I'll do what Grandpa wants," Monty declared as he clenched his fists. "What's important for us is to get stronger." Monty's relationship with his wife Hannah had ended because of the fight with Dalton. Now all he wanted was to cause Kevin as much pain as he'd given him. More and more of them came forward to support Grandpa Williams' decision to join the Myriads. "Then it's settled," Grandpa said. "And remember, this has to be kept secret if we're to gain an upper hand." Then he motioned for everyone to leave. After they'd all gone, Randall Williams pulled out his phone and called Seth Roundtree's number. As soon as the call was connected, he told Roundtree that his family was willing to join the Myriads. Then he invited him to come to the Williams mansion if he had the time.
"That's great news. You won't regret this. I'll be there tomorrow," Roundtree replied. They spent a minute or two discussing some details before hanging up. While this was going on, Kevin was pulling up to the Whistler Hotel with Professor Murdoch. He parked in the VIP area and walked in with her. Mike saw that everyone was starting to trickle in. He walked up to the front desk proudly and said to the staff, "Hi, we're going to need your largest private room." There were more than 70 students in the group.
The hotel definitely would have to open up its biggest private room to accommodate them. Good evening, sir. Our largest private room is the VIP room. Please show us your VIP membership card and we'll get things set up right away. The hotel's concierge informed him politely. He'd noticed Mike and the others as soon as they'd walked in the lobby. Unfortunately, the Whistler Hotel's largest room was only available to special guests. Mitchell Cook didn't mind if the largest private rooms remained empty most of the time. It was more important to have them available for his wealthiest clients. Since the staff hadn't been alerted by Cook that there would be a VIP group this evening, they assumed that this bunch of students didn't have the proper reservation.
What kind of rule is that? I don't have a membership card and I'm not from around here. All we need is a room. I don't care how much it costs, I'm willing to cover it,
Mike said confidently. I'm sorry, sir, without a VIP membership card, we won't be able to open the room for you, the concierge replied firmly.
Then can I apply for a membership card right now?
Mike asked. You could tell he was extremely disappointed to see his plans fall apart like this. I'm sorry, sir. Our largest private room is only available for our most exclusive members. Also, the hotel's owner must be present when someone applies for the card. Today, Mr. Cook is attending to some business and isn't on the property. So you can only apply for a basic membership card at the moment. The application fee is $25,000, the concierge explained with a cheerful smile. The students who heard this were disappointed. Even though the Salix Leaf Hotel had a great reputation, the Whistler was also pretty upscale.
Damn it! $25,000 just for an application fee? I feel like I'm being robbed,
Mike complained. He really wanted to turn around and leave right then, but when he saw that some of his classmates had already started taking pictures to post online, he changed his mind. They were all excited to be dining in a private room at the Whistler Hotel. He was ready to give up, not just on the dinner, but on being elected student leader. While Mike was trying to resolve his dilemma, Penny Sutherland walked up to him and suggested, "Why don't I call Mr. Cook for you?" Suddenly, the students let out a sigh of relief. The Sutherland family had a great reputation, and getting a private room would be a piece of cake for Penny.
I'm really sorry, Penny. I didn't know that this hotel had so many rules, or I would have planned better. It's a bummer that I have to ask for your help with this,
Mike apologized with a charming smile. The concierge heard Penny say this and offered a suggestion to the problem. If you know Mr. Cook, all you need to do is give him a call and we can set things up once he gives us the word. Right away, Penny pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contact list until she found Mitchell Cook's number. Before she came to Chicago to attend school, her family had given her the contact information for all the famous people in the city. Unfortunately, the call didn't go through. There was an audible gasp from the students who had been crowding around her. Cook was one of the most prominent people in Chicago. How dare he hang up on someone like Penny Sutherland? I'm sorry, ma'am, there's nothing we can do about this. Without express permission from Mr. Cook, we're not allowed to open up the VIP room. The concierge apologized before adding, we do have some smaller private rooms on the third floor of our hotel. They're very close to each other, but we'll have to split up your group.
If we have to divide the group, then we'll have to forget about the whole thing,
Mike answered sadly. Penny was a little embarrassed. She quietly put her phone away and stepped aside. Everyone was incredibly disappointed to see this. If Penny Sutherland couldn't get them in the VIP room, then the situation was hopeless. Mike had just about given up. He looked at the crowd of students anxiously, unsure what to do next. Just then, Kevin walked up to the front desk. He took a card out of his wallet and handed it to the concierge, saying, let's see if I can help open up the VIP room for this nice group of students.
Kevin, what are you trying to do with your bus pass? Don't you know what kind of place this is? If Penny couldn't get us in, what do you think you're going to be able to do? Why don't you just give up before you make yourself look like a complete fool?
Mike chastised him. Well, it's better than your plan. Do you expect us all to stand around here with our fingers in our noses? Kevin replied with a straight face.
Can't you see that I'm trying to solve this problem? Mike retorted angrily. I've had enough of you. Why don't you just move along? I'm getting tired of looking at you.
Lionel immediately defended his friend and sneered. Mike's right. What can a useless piece of crap like you do anyway? If you can really get them to open the VIP room, how come you're still mooching off of the Jones family?
Stop embarrassing yourself pretending to be someone you're not, Luther also teased.
Their insults got a lot of attention from the crowd. Some of the students laughed out loud. The rest of them just scoffed at Kevin. Most of them were from Chicago and they'd actually been to the Whistler Hotel before, but they'd never had the chance to dine in the large private room up on the top floor. It was incredibly difficult to get VIP status at the hotel. Not only did it take a lot of money, but you also had to have some pretty high social status and connections. So what was Kevin doing handling the concierge a bus pass? Since you think this is just a bus pass, I guess I'll just put it back in my wallet, Kevin said as he started to take it back from the concierge.
Well, since you've already taken it out, why don't we give it a try? Mike replied.
He obviously didn't want to pass up this opportunity to make Kevin look like a fool, so he ramped things up and added,
"Let's see what the hotel staff can do with it."
While the crowd was laughing at Kevin, the hotel employees were staring in disbelief. They weren't sure how to defuse the situation. The employee who was holding Kevin's card started to get very nervous when she took a good look at it. During their training, all of the employees of the Whistler Hotel had been required to memorize the appearance of the Supreme VIP card, and that's exactly what Kevin had handed her. Cook had explained to them that there were only 5 cards like this in all of Chicago, and they were only given to the hotel's most prestigious clients. The group of students saw the look on the concierge's face and started to wonder what would happen next. When the students arrived at the Whistler Hotel with Professor Murdoch, they couldn't get into the large VIP room, which was the only hall big enough to accommodate all 70 of them. Mike Tripp was embarrassed because he didn't have VIP access, and Penny Sutherland's call to Cook was rejected. They were about to give up when Kevin handed his card to one of the employees. She was shocked for a moment and couldn't speak. Finally, she asked, "Sir, is this card really yours?" "What's wrong?" Kevin frowned as he replied. "This is the card Mr. Cook gave me. Is there a problem with it?" The concierge didn't answer Kevin's question right away. She walked around the counter and handed him his card as she explained. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you had a VIP card. Please accept my apologies for this misunderstanding." The students who heard this thought that it was a joke. Had Kevin stolen the card from the Jones family? That wasn't possible, they thought, because Kevin's in-laws weren't aristocratic enough to have one.
"So then where did Kevin get this card from?" Luther asked.
Lionel started to question him too. "Kevin, this card has got to be..." Before he could finish, Kevin asked the concierge, "Can you please open the private room now?" "Of course. We'll take care of that right away. Everything will be ready in just a moment," she replied with cheerful promptness as she turned around to send someone upstairs to prepare the room. What surprised her was that out of all of the well-dressed students, it was the shabby one who didn't look like he belonged there who actually had the VIP card. She felt lucky to have a chance to remedy the situation before Kevin was offended. The head server came down a few minutes later to lead the group up to the top floor. When they got to the VIP room, he handed Kevin's card back to him and wished him a pleasant meal.
"How did you ever get lucky enough to find a card like that?" Mike asked him in a sarcastic tone.
Kevin's classmates thought Mike was right. After all, how could a good-for-nothing like him have gotten one of those cards legitimately? "Well, why don't you go out and find one yourself?" Kevin said coldly. He just didn't understand why everyone was still making fun of him right after he'd helped them all out. But then he told himself that it wouldn't matter anyway if he fought back. After all, they weren't even on the same level as him. Mike gave up and walked over to the entrance to ask the waiters to bring some menus for the group. But because Professor Murdoch was there, everyone hesitated to place their orders.
"Why don't you order for us, Professor?" Mike offered graciously.
"We're not in school, Mike. Don't be shy just because I'm here. This is supposed to be fun," Professor Murdoch responded as she gently gave him back the menu. Penny sat quietly off to the side and didn't have the slightest intention of ordering. Kevin was completely left out and nobody even bothered to give him a menu. Suddenly someone shouted, "Wow, they actually have a Grand Cru from Burgundy. You can't get that anywhere else around here." Kevin spat his water out when he heard his classmate say that. It was the same wine that Jason had ordered for all of the tables when the Jones family was celebrating Lily's contract with Williams Media. At $20,000 a bottle, the exclusive French wine was so expensive that they all had to chip in to help pay the bill.
"It's my treat. Get whatever you want,"
Mike proudly declared. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. Even Penny gave him a strange look when she heard him say that. When the food and drinks were carried out to the tables, Mike stood up to give everyone a toast. As he raised his glass, he glanced down at the bill.
"What the hell is this? $375,000? $300,000 for 15 bottles of wine?"
Mike said to himself. Somehow he managed to look calm as he processed all of this. Then Lionel made an announcement. "Hey, everyone, listen to me. Take a look at this wonderful feast. Who else would be this generous? I think we should just elect Mike student leader right now so we can save ourselves the time tomorrow in class." The students all seemed to agree with him. But they weren't fools, and they knew exactly why Mike was treating them. Mike was very happy to see this. At least the expense would be worth it. He waved his hand and acted like it was no big deal.
"Don't make such a fuss over me. After all, Professor Murdoch has the final say in the election. I'm just treating the class so we can all get to know each other better." "Don't be so modest, Mike. Who's better qualified to be our class leader?" Luther chimed in.
The rest of the students just sat there quietly and watched the show that the three of them were putting on. But they didn't want to seem ungrateful, so they were willing to go along with the idea of electing Mike to the position.
"Since no one has any objections, then how could I decline? But let's just call it a temporary position. If anyone feels that I'm not carrying my weight, just say so,"
Mike declared as he raised his glass to toast his classmates. Professor Murdoch stayed out of the discussion and quietly observed her students as they drank their wine and socialized with each other. Meanwhile, Penny just sat quietly by the window nursing her glass demurely. Her classmates were too intimidated by her to go up and talk to her. While this was going on, Mike took Lionel aside and asked him to go down to his car and bring back a red gift box that he'd left in the trunk. Lionel came back a few minutes later and handed it to his friend. Then Mike carried the box over to Professor Murdoch and told her,
"Please accept this small gift from me, Professor."
His classmates all started to whisper to each other. Now they could tell that Mike had planned this all along. They'd let him buy his way into the position as student leader. On the other hand, who would have wanted to pay for 15 bottles of wine at $20,000 a pop? Of course, they were correct. Mike was definitely planning to run for the position, so he'd spent a lot of money on his gift for their professor. Professor Murdoch glanced at the gift box very stoically. "Mike, I appreciate your good intentions, but faculty members are not allowed to accept gifts from students," she pointed out very seriously. "It was already very expensive for you to treat your classmates to dinner tonight, so I think you should keep this gift for yourself."
"Please, understand it's just a small token, not a gift," Mike replied with a flattering smile. "Why don't you just take a look inside before you decide?"
"I'm sorry, Mike, but it's just not appropriate," she began to explain. But before she could finish what she was saying, Mike opened the box. There was a cream-colored pill inside. Everyone gasped when they saw it. They'd all heard about what had happened at the Pearl family's auction house, and they knew a power pill was worth a fortune. So what was this herbal med and how much could it possibly be worth? Professor Murdoch was absolutely speechless, and she stared at the pill in amazement. When Mike handed her the box, she thought it was some kind of expensive jewelry, maybe a necklace. But this was quite a surprise. After all, medicinal pills were getting to be a very popular item, even among the faculty members at the school. Professor Murdoch had been at a plateau in her physical and mental development for a while now, and could definitely use a boost to move up to the next level. The room was absolutely silent. Someone suddenly asked, "Mike, what kind of medicinal pill did you prepare for Professor Murdoch? What does it do?"
"A really good friend of my father's gave it to me. When I was accepted in the school for the healing arts, my father passed it along to me," Mike said with a proud smile. "According to my father's friend, this is an augmentation pill and it can help you really increase your power and mental focus."
There was a huge commotion as they all started chattering. Had they heard him right? They knew that Professor Murdoch had to be very well trained already, so this would really make a difference for her. The students could only dream about something like this. Mike had really given their professor something very valuable. Professor Murdoch was in a state of shock. She'd only read about the augmentation pill and its physical and mental benefits, but she'd never actually seen one before. If this was really an augmentation pill, then she had no choice but to accept it from Mike. The heck with the school's rules and regulations. The way Professor Murdoch saw it, if she gave Mike a recommendation in exchange for the pill, then it wasn't really a gift. With her connections, there were a lot of strings she could pull to help him. Her mind was spinning with all sorts of ridiculous ideas.
"Please accept it, Professor Murdoch,"
Mike said with a smile. Of course, he knew exactly what she was thinking. "Since you insist, I really have no choice," she said as she hid her excitement and took the box from Mike. Just then, they were interrupted by a loud voice. "Professor Murdoch, you can't take that pill." Everyone was stunned and turned to see who had spoken. It was Kevin. He quickly walked over to Professor Murdoch and closely examined the pill in the box.
"Kevin, what are you up to now?"
Mike asked him unhappily. It hadn't been easy for him to get Professor Murdoch to accept the pill, but now this jerk was going to ruin everything. "Professor Murdoch, this isn't an augmentation pill. I can guarantee that if you take this pill, it will definitely do you a lot of harm," Kevin informed her very seriously.
"Kevin, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Do you actually think my father's friend would have lied to him?" Mike shouted. "Mike, pay attention to your tone," Professor Murdoch reminded him.
"I'm sorry, Professor Murdoch, but this guy's pissing me off."
Mike sneered at Kevin and continued his rant.
"I understand what's going on. You're jealous that I can get a pill like this and you can't. It's just that I'm from a better family than you are, and I'm also richer and more handsome than you. That has to be disappointing."
"You think you're more handsome than me? Everyone knows that just isn't true," Kevin teased him.
"What do you mean by that?"
Mike retorted as he slammed his fist on the table. "Don't be angry, Mike. This whole thing really isn't worth it." Lionel tried to persuade his friend. Then Luther tried to calm him down.
"Relax, Mike. You're absolutely right. Kevin must be jealous of you. That's why he said there's something wrong with this pill."
"You still don't understand, do you? Both you and your father were cheated by someone. This isn't an augmentation pill at all," Kevin told them bluntly. "An augmentation pill is more of a light blue color. Plus it contains some floral ingredients which gives it a beautiful fragrance. Take another look at the medicinal pill you just gave our professor," Kevin continued. "It's obviously the wrong color and has no fragrance at all." They were all stunned to hear him say this. Even Penny reacted and stared keenly at Kevin. Mike thought about what Kevin had said and his frown turned into a vicious sneer.
"I really didn't expect you to go this far just out of jealousy. Let me ask you something. Have you ever actually seen an augmentation pill with your own eyes?" Mike asked him. "What makes you think you know so much about them?"
Ignoring Mike's questions, Kevin turned around and looked at Professor Murdoch. "Professor, if you believe me, you'll give this pill back to Mike. But please don't blame him for it. After all, he and his father were both deceived. But if you don't believe me, then go right ahead and take the pill." Not only had Kevin seen an augmentation pill before, but he'd actually made one and taken it too. He decided not to argue with Mike because he didn't want to stoop to his level. As they say, let sleeping dogs lie. There was no way he could convince Mike he'd made a mistake. And Kevin couldn't slip a real augmentation pill into the box right now anyway, so the best he could do was to warn Professor Murdoch. After all, she'd already gone through years of training and study, so there's no way she'd be tempted to take the pill. Or would she? When Mike Tripp presented Professor Murdoch with a gift, she refused to accept it at first because school regulations prohibited faculty from accepting anything from students. But when he showed her that it was an augmentation pill, she was tempted to bend the rules. Unfortunately, Kevin interrupted them and explained that it wasn't an augmentation pill at all and could actually hurt her. As it turned out, Kevin may have overestimated Professor Murdoch's restraint. She was mesmerized by the pill and couldn't take her eyes off it. She hadn't made any progress in 6 years and was tempted to swallow the pill right now to see if it could help her improve her physical and cognitive health. "Kevin, you must have misunderstood what Mike said," Professor Murdoch murmured. "I can clearly see that there's nothing wrong with this pill." "What did you just say?" Kevin looked at Professor Murdoch blankly. "Did you hear what Professor Murdoch just told you? You're so full of crap. With all that stuff you were saying earlier, it turns out you don't know anything. You're just pretending to be some kind of expert to get a little attention. How pathetic," Lionel mocked Kevin openly.
"We all came out here to have fun tonight. Don't let Kevin spoil our good time,"
Luther said to his classmates as he poured himself another glass of wine.
"Come on, everyone. Have another drink and unwind." "Some people have no idea what they're talking about,"
Mike sneered at Kevin. Then he turned and looked at Professor Murdoch.
"Go ahead and take the pill right now. Don't let Kevin's jealousy stop you."
She nodded in agreement and swallowed the pill. Kevin could only sigh when he saw this. He turned around and walked out of the room. Out of boredom, he headed to the restroom to freshen up. Kevin just didn't understand what was wrong with people nowadays. Why didn't anyone listen to his advice? On his way back to the VIP room, Kevin saw Mike standing by the stairs with Luther and Lionel. They seemed to be discussing something in a low voice. Out of curiosity, Kevin quietly walked over and listened to them.
"You really were impressive, Mike. Kevin had to be humiliated after that."
Luther flattered his friend.
"Impressive my butt. He's just a nobody. It didn't take any effort at all to put him in his place," Mike bragged. "And what the hell was that wine? Do you realize that this dinner cost me over $375,000?
"Are you kidding? That's outrageous," Lionel asked as his eyes grew wide. Based on what his family had given him for living expenses in Chicago, the meal had cost about 10 years of his allowance.
"I was planning to drop a few thousand on the dinner at most, but I never expected the Whistler Hotel to be this expensive,"
Mike admitted as he pulled out a pack of gum.
"Dinner's almost over. If I don't pay the bill, I'll be up the creek and this will have all been for nothing."
Luther thought for a while and then his face lit up.
"Hey, Mike, I think I got an idea. I just don't know if you'll be too embarrassed to try it. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't keep us waiting,"
Mike said impatiently.
"It's simple. Lionel and I will keep toasting you. After a while, you'll pretend to be drunk and pass out. The class is full of rich people who can afford to foot the bill," Luther said proudly. "What do you think?" "It's true they can afford it, but who's carrying around $300,000 on a school night?" Mike replied as he popped his chewing gum.
"But isn't Penny here?" Lionel continued. "Her family's loaded. $300,000 would be a drop in the bucket for her. If you're out of it, I'm sure she'll help out." Mike was worried about this plan and wondered out loud.
"It wouldn't be a great idea to trick her like that."
He really didn't want to make a bad impression on Penny.
"No problem, Mike," Luther continued. "If Penny helps you pay the bill, you can use it as an excuse to get closer to her. You could even connect with her online to arrange to repay her and to get to know her better."
Mike got really excited by this idea. He slapped Luther on the back and said,
"I like the way you think. It's a good thing I brought you two guys along."
When Kevin heard this, he quickly headed back to the VIP room. As he got to the door, Penny was walking out. Kevin came up with a plan of his own. As Penny brushed against him, he used the light touch that he'd learned about in the secret guide and took her phone and wallet. Let's see what Mike does now. Kevin smirked as he slipped the items into his jacket. With all his posturing, he isn't really that strong. Let's see him show his true colors. When Kevin returned to his seat and sat down, Mike and his two buddies were just walking into the room. Luther and Lionel really put on an act for everyone. After a few glasses of wine, Mike slumped onto the table and pretended to be drunk. When Kevin saw this, he raised an eyebrow and thought to himself, "Not a bad performance. It's a shame this guy didn't go into acting." After a while, everyone was pretty full and decided it was time to head home. "What the heck? Is Mike drunk?" one of the students commented. "No way. Mike can handle it," Lionel replied while he also pretended to be a little tipsy. He walked over to Mike and nudged him a few times. "It's late, Mike. Wake up. Time to go." But Mike didn't move. "Wow, Mike's really out of it." Lionel shook his head slightly as he called over to the server. "What's the damage?" "Sir, the total comes to $375,000, including $300,000 for the wine. We gave you a discount on the price as well as the service fee, so the total comes to $360,000. The waiter smiled as he asked, "Will that be cash or credit?" "Could you please repeat that? How much is the bill?" Lionel was a little confused. $360,000 after the discount, of course. The waiter answered as he gave him a very professional smile. The students were all in shock when they heard him say that. Even though they were all from wealthy families, they'd never squandered their money like this. Who could? "I can't believe we ate that much." Lionel shook his head as he continued to put on a show for everyone. "I promised Mike I'd help him with the bill, but that's a lot of money." It was clear to all of them what Lionel was getting at. He was looking for someone to pay the bill because he couldn't afford to cover it. They all looked at each other and wondered what to do. The students could help pay, but Mike was supposed to be treating them. Why should they have to contribute anything? Then Luther suggested,
"Kevin used his Supreme VIP card to open up the room. Why don't we just put the charge on his account? Then Mike can settle with him tomorrow."
They all agreed that this was a good plan. After all, if that really was Kevin's VIP card, then he could afford it. If it wasn't, then it didn't matter anyway. Kevin almost laughed out loud when he heard what they were saying. What kind of people are they? He wondered. First they kept mocking me, and now they can't afford to pay for dinner and they want to put it all on my card? Pretty shameless. The server saw what was going on but continued to be professional and polite. "I'm sorry, everyone. While VIP members enjoy a lot of privileges, they must settle all debts before leaving." That certainly got the room to quiet down. Nobody had that much on them. Would they even be allowed to leave the room? Although Professor Murdoch wanted to help Mike out, she couldn't get that much money together in such a short time. "Why don't I pay the bill?" Penny suddenly offered. They all looked over at her and started to relax when they realized she was going to help them out of this mess. But Penny didn't pay any attention to their whispering. She casually reached into her bag to get her wallet. After all, $300,000 wasn't that much money for her. Plus, it was just a temporary loan. Penny's face froze as she rooted through her bag and discovered that her wallet and even her phone were missing. "What's going on? I know I put them in my bag," she wondered. Because she'd been taught how to handle problems, Penny was able to remain calm, even though she was starting to panic. She really has good self-control, Kevin thought as he watched her empty her purse onto the table. The students started to get nervous when they realized they might have to cover the bill after all. It would cost at least $5,000 each. Finally, Mike decided to stop pretending to be asleep. He stood up and announced, "I'm sorry, everybody. I just had a little too much wine and accidentally fell asleep." Then he yawned and said to them,
"It's getting late. Why don't you all head home? I'll take care of the bill. See you in class."
Mike knew that he couldn't keep pretending or his classmates would get angry with him and the whole thing would have been for nothing.
"What's the final bill?"
Mike asked the server as he pulled out his phone. When he found out the cost, Mike looked a little worried, and then he commented,
"That's not very expensive. I don't have that much on me right now, but don't worry, I'm calling my dad to straighten things out."
Mike phoned his father, Wyatt Tripp. He was a well-known import-export tycoon in Detroit.
Dad, are you busy now? Can you send me $400,000?
Mike bit the bullet and asked him.
I'm treating all my classmates to dinner this evening.
He figured it was better to be scolded by his father than to be embarrassed in front of his entire class.
How much do you want?
His father asked him. As expected, Wyatt started to freak out.
Do you think money grows on trees? Didn't I just give you that much a few days ago?
How could Wyatt Tripp not go ballistic? He'd worked his entire life to build up his business, and now his son was just giving his money away. Mike was frustrated by his father's response. He'd only gotten in this situation because he was trying to get elected student leader. If his father wasn't willing to help, he might have to tell his classmates the truth.
What are you talking about, Dad? School's going great and my teachers are fantastic,
Mike told his father, laying it on thick.
It's definitely a serious program.
What the hell are you talking about? When did I ask you about school? Wyatt shouted into his phone. I don't give a crap if you like the place or not.
Don't worry, Dad, I'm doing great, he continued. But it would really help if you could transfer some money into my account.
I'll transfer $200,000, but remember this. I don't want to hear a word from you about money for another year, Wyatt roared at his son. With a kid like you, I'll have nothing left to retire on. After Wyatt hung up the phone, Mike forced a smile and looked at his classmates.
My dad can be a little long-winded, but the money's on the way.
A moment later, Mike's phone vibrated, and he knew that his father had transferred the money.
Damn it, I'll only have about $200,000 left after I pay the bill,
Mike muttered to himself as he handed his card to the server. While they were all waiting for their rides to pick them up, one of the students asked Professor Murdoch, How do you feel after taking the augmentation pill? No change so far. Maybe it hasn't taken effect yet, she replied softly. They were all stunned to hear that. By now, she should have started feeling something. They started wondering if Kevin may have been right after all. Lionel changed the subject. Wow, $360,000 just for dinner. Mike sure is a great guy. They knew that Lionel was just complimenting his friend, but it certainly was true. Mike had done what he'd promised. He was relieved to see that he finally had the class's approval. It had been a successful evening, and they'd all gotten to know each other a lot better. But as they were leaving, nobody said anything to Kevin. I'll give you a ride back in a few minutes if you want. I only had a sip of wine, and I'm in pretty good shape, Kevin said casually to Professor Murdoch. I can tell you've been doing some advanced training, Professor Murdoch remarked. Kevin finished his coffee and then gestured for the professor to head out to the parking lot with him. He was wondering if she was beginning to see through his facade. After Mike's father transferred enough money to him to settle the bill at the Witzler Hotel, the students started to head home. Kevin offered to give Professor Murdoch a ride, and she accepted. He was beginning to worry because she seemed to be starting to realize that there was something more to him than met the eye. Let's go, Professor. I'll take you back to campus and then I'll go home. Kevin didn't pay any attention to Professor Murdoch's surprise at his abilities. He figured this was going to happen sooner or later. When they got into the car, Professor Murdoch couldn't help asking, Kevin, tell me honestly, who's your mentor? Why are you so suddenly interested in me, Professor? Kevin smiled as he steered through traffic. I'm curious to know what kind of person was able to teach you so much at such a young age, she replied, without even bothering to hide her amazement. This comment surprised Kevin. He turned onto the highway and hit the gas as he answered her. Professor Murdoch, some people would be hurt by your remark. If I've gotten this strong, it's only because I'm smart enough to know what to do. It has nothing to do with my mentor. She didn't reply to Kevin right away. Instead, she looked at him questioningly. Then she took a deep breath and continued. Kevin, I was wrong about you. You've already made an enormous amount of progress. As long as you take the time to train hard and apply yourself, I'm sure you'll excel at the final exam 4 years from now. There's no telling where that could lead. It's a little too soon to talk about that, Kevin responded very casually. Professor Murdoch wanted to say something else, but her face suddenly turned pale. Large drops of sweat formed on her forehead, and she started to feel weak. Are you all right, Professor? Kevin asked her as he quickly slowed down and pulled to the side of the road. "I'll be fine. Just keep on driving. It's probably because I haven't had any wine in a long time," she speculated. "Really?" Kevin frowned as he looked at Professor Murdoch. He could tell that this wasn't just because of a little wine. "It's getting late, Kevin. Just head to campus so you can drop me off and head home," she replied as she controlled her breathing to calm herself down. Since Professor Murdoch insisted that she was okay, Kevin dropped the subject. It took him more than an hour to take her to the school parking lot and then get home. By the time he got back, Lily and Dorothy were already asleep. Kevin took out his books on herbal medicine to figure out what kind of pill Professor Murdoch had taken. Based on the color and smell of the pill Mike had given her, Kevin was able to find it in his materials. It was a neutralization pill. Fortunately, it wouldn't be fatal to her. However, it would severely diminish any progress that she'd already made in her physical and mental training. After about 5 days, she would be like any other normal person, and she wouldn't be able to use medicinal herbs to regain what she had lost. "I can't believe that this pill can do all that," Kevin marveled. His thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar ringtone. For a second, he wondered if there was a burglar in the house, but then he realized that the sound was coming from his pocket. Who would be making a video call to Penny in the middle of the night? Could it be her boyfriend? Kevin wondered. By reflex, he answered the call. A moment later, he saw a beautiful woman standing in front of her closet picking out clothes. "Oops, didn't mean to see that," Kevin thought to himself. She looked very familiar to him, but he just couldn't place her. While he was looking at her, trying to figure out who she was, the woman turned around to see why nobody was talking yet. When she saw Kevin, she screamed and disconnected the call. That's when Kevin realized that she was the young woman whose grandfather had taken the bad pill at the Pearl family's auction house. Seconds later, the phone rang again. The caller ID showed the same number as before, so Kevin picked up the call. "Hello, are you Kevin?" the woman asked. She was slightly embarrassed to have been seen by him in a video chat. The young woman turned out to be Penny's best friend, Mackenzie Knott. 2 years before, the Sutherland family had secretly joined the Myriads. What even Kevin didn't know was that the Myriads had been secretly recruiting a lot of powerful families over the past few years. Mackenzie was the one who had recruited the Sutherlands, and she and Penny had become great friends since then. Mackenzie was calling Penny late at night because she had something to tell her, but she hadn't expected a man to answer her friend's phone, especially when she was pretty sure that Penny didn't have a boyfriend. She recognized Kevin as the man who had saved her grandfather's life at the Pearl family's auction. "What's going on?" Kevin pretended to be calm as he replied. "What are you doing with Penny's phone?" Mackenzie said in a very demanding tone. "That sounds like you're accusing me of something. How do you know Penny didn't just lose her phone and I found it?" Kevin retorted. He knew that Penny would soon find out that he had her phone, so he decided to act like he was completely innocent. "I don't care if you found it or stole it, just give it back to her tomorrow," Mackenzie ordered him. "And what if I don't?" Kevin snapped back. He wasn't really worried. After all, he was friends with Brett Stewart, who had a pretty high rank in the Myriads. "What did you just say? If you don't return her phone tomorrow, you're a dead man." Then Mackenzie abruptly hung up. What the hell? Why is everyone so violent lately? One wrong word and you're dead, Kevin asked himself. Then Kevin thought about how different Mackenzie had seemed when he met her at the auction. The rest of the night passed very quickly. Early the next morning, Kevin drove to campus with Lily. As soon as he walked into the classroom, he broke into a grin. There was a new student in the seat next to his. "Meriwether, what are you doing here?" Kevin asked as he walked up to the man and rapped his knuckles on the desks. "Hey, get the..." But before he could finish what he was saying, he recognized Kevin and changed his tone. "Why, Kevin, what brings you here?" "I'm here for class, of course." Kevin smiled as he took a seat. Meriwether looked at Kevin and suddenly felt very depressed. This guy had already beaten him up twice, at the Jones family mansion and then in prison. Why couldn't he get rid of the guy? "Why do I keep running into you?" Meriwether muttered to himself. "What did you say?" Kevin asked with a broad smile.
Nothing,
Meriwether replied as he turned his head away. He didn't want to look at Kevin right now. Fortunately, nobody had found out about the 2 times Kevin had beaten him up, but if it happened at the School for the Healing Arts, he'd be a laughingstock. Just as Kevin was about to say something else, he smelled a strong perfume in the air. Before he could react, Penny was standing in front of him. Everyone in the room noticed this. It was only the 3rd day of class, but they were all very interested in anything that Penny did. "Do you have my phone? Give it back to me right now," Penny said to him directly as she held out her hand. Last night, Mackenzie had sent someone to tell Penny that Kevin had her missing phone. As Kevin's classmates watched this play out, they were very confused. What was he doing with Penny's phone? Were they friends? "Great. I found it on the way out of the Whistler Hotel last night, and I was wondering whose it was, but everybody had already left," Kevin replied calmly as he handed it back to Penny. He'd already rehearsed a few explanations. "You didn't go through any of my photos, did you?" she asked him angrily. "Of course not, Penny. What do you think I am, some kind of perv?" Kevin replied as he acted hurt. Kevin couldn't help noticing just how furious Penny seemed to be with him. "I just told you that I found it. Why are you treating me like a pickpocket or something?" Kevin asked her boldly as he stood up to stand face to face with her. He decided that he needed to discourage Penny from asking any more questions. Otherwise, he might slip up and tell her the truth. "My phone is always in my bag unless I'm talking on it. So tell me again, where did you pick it up?" Penny interrogated him coldly. "I've already explained it to you clearly, Penny. Don't think you can bully me just because you're from a wealthy family. I may be poor, but I'd never steal anything," Kevin insisted breathlessly. She couldn't tell that he was pretending and thought Kevin was really getting upset. "Are you accusing me of trying to frame you?" Penny asked him. Then she got worried. "Why are you getting so angry with me?" Lionel butted in before Kevin could say anything. "Are you trying to intimidate Penny just because she's asking you a few questions?" Then Luther got up and chastised Kevin.
"Don't be a jerk. Even if you didn't steal her phone, that's no reason to threaten her. How'd you like to end up down at the police station?"
Meriwether saw his chance and decided to jump in too.
"Call the police? You've really underestimated Kevin. He's already done time. Why don't you ask him what for?"
That really caused an uproar. Kevin had been to prison? Is that why the Jones family couldn't stand him? The whole class burst into laughter at the thought of Kevin being an ex-con. Meriwether sneered at Kevin. Now that he saw him being ridiculed by his classmates, Meriwether stopped being so afraid of him. After all, this was a school, not a prison.
"I'll tell you what happened," Meriwether announced to the class. "He drank too much and got into a fight at the Salix Leaf Hotel. They sent him to prison for nearly a month."
The students were all shocked to hear this. He really sounded like a violent person, and they shuddered to think what he'd do if he got angry.
"So you've been to prison and you're also hard up for cash? Then you have the nerve to steal Penny's phone and expect us to believe that you just found it?"
Mike scoffed. "Since you all think that I stole it, there's nothing I can say to change your minds." Kevin snarled at them. Then he looked at Penny and asked her, "But do you know why I took your phone?"
"Listen to that, everyone. This scumbag just admitted it himself,"
Mike shouted as he pointed at Kevin. Penny clenched her fists tightly. Her eyes flashed with anger, and right now she felt nothing but contempt for Kevin. This was the first time someone had ever stolen something from her, and it turned out to be one of her own classmates. Kevin was completely derailed. The whole situation had gotten out of hand, and he was running the risk of getting kicked out of school. "Please, listen to me, Penny," Kevin explained. "Mike couldn't afford to pay for the dinner last night, so he planned to pretend to be drunk and then get you to cover the expenses for him. He was also hoping to connect with you online. I was just helping you out." "Do you expect me to believe that?" Penny snarled as she gritted her teeth. "Are you still trying to pin this whole thing on Mike?" Their classmates all started to discuss the situation with each other. How could a petty thief have gotten into their high-class school? And none of them believed his excuse at all. While they were all mocking Kevin so horribly, Mike looked over at Lionel and Luther. They could tell what he was thinking. How did this jerk find out about what happened last night? They just shook their heads and didn't say a word. Mike felt really lucky that his father had bailed him out last night, or he'd have been humiliated in front of the entire school. But Kevin wasn't feeling quite so lucky. How the heck was he going to straighten this whole mess out? Kevin had been backed into a corner by Penny's accusations, so he finally told her why he'd taken her phone. Mike couldn't figure out how Kevin knew about his plan to get her to pay for the dinner at the Whistler Hotel's VIP room. But Meriwether had managed to let everyone know that Kevin had been in prison, so the situation was looking pretty bad for Kevin.
Didn't I just say that you wouldn't come up with a decent excuse? After all, do I look like someone who wouldn't have enough money to pay a bill?
Mike bragged to everyone. Well, you should know better than anyone else, Kevin replied calmly.
What do you mean by that, scumbag? Do you want to get your butt kicked?
Mike shouted as his temper flared. He started to roll up his sleeves and walk over toward Kevin like he was ready for a fight. Just then, everyone heard the sound of footsteps coming down the hall toward the classroom. Professor Murdoch walked in carrying a book and asked them, "Why is everyone so lively today? It's almost time for class to start, so let's all take our seats."
You got here just in time, Professor Murdoch. Kevin stole Penny's phone yesterday, but he's trying to tell us that he just found it at the Whistler Hotel,
Mike said very sanctimoniously. Mike, that's nothing to be joking about. You know that this school doesn't tolerate that kind of behavior, but I believe that Kevin would never do something like that, Professor Murdoch told them as she placed the book on her desk. Now everyone go back to your seats. I have something exciting to tell you. In fact, if this had happened the day before, Professor Murdoch might have believed it. But now she knew more about Kevin and what he was capable of doing. If he was already trained as an apothecary at such a young age, there was no telling how high he could climb. She hadn't met a student with this much potential in years. So she was considering taking Kevin under her wing to train him herself. But she was worried that Kevin's classmates would tick him off and might even attack him. With his abilities, Professor Murdoch was probably the only person in the class who had a chance of stopping him. After everyone had returned to their seats, Professor Murdoch continued. As you probably recall, there was serious flooding in our state a while back, and a lot of the victims are still in need of assistance. Our school has always believed in helping the less fortunate. So last night, the administration decided to organize a fundraising event with each class forming a team. There's no limit on the amount that you can donate, Professor Murdoch explained. Then she got to the incentive. Whichever class has the most donations will receive a generous reward from the school. As her voice fell, the entire classroom went wild.
What kind of reward do you think they'll give us?
One of them asked.
Whatever it is, it has to be fantastic,
replied another. They wondered if the school might even give the winners some kind of advanced herbal medicine to help increase their intelligence. Professor Murdoch had already written the word fundraiser on the board. Then she wrote down a code for them to use. Considering that a lot of you don't carry much cash around, the school arranged for online donations. You can transfer the funds directly from your bank account. The students all started pulling out their phones. They were all from rich families and could afford to donate at least $25,000. A few of them even donated more than that. Just to show off, Mike immediately donated $60,000.
Did you see that, Kevin? You still think I don't have any money? How could someone who's short on cash donate $60,000?
Mike bragged so that everyone could hear him.
Mike's a great guy, and I saw Kevin steal Penny's phone with my own eyes.
Lionel stood up and started jeering.
Professor Murdoch, I think we should report this to the administration. Someone like Kevin isn't fit to be in this school,
Luther said disdainfully. Professor Murdoch's expression turned sour when she heard that. Kevin, did you really steal Penny's phone? No matter how much potential she saw in Kevin, the professor couldn't let him get away with something like stealing. He'd have to be punished. For one thing, they couldn't afford to share their secrets with someone who might use them maliciously. That would be disastrous.
Don't even bother to ask him about it. The best way to deal with Kevin is to have him expelled so he won't embarrass us,
Mike said very seriously. The rest of the students nodded in agreement. "Kevin, it seems like I've misjudged you," Professor Murdoch said sadly. She was already in a bad mood today. She didn't know why, but she woke up feeling even weaker than the night before. "Professor Murdoch, could you please return my phone to me?" Kevin asked her calmly as he walked up to the podium. "I want to make a donation too." His words immediately brought laughter from the room. They all started to jeer at him. How could someone who's so hard up that they need to steal a phone make any kind of donation? "Why don't you let him have it, Professor? Let's see how much money this delinquent can donate," one of them urged her. She took a long look at Kevin and then took his phone out of her briefcase, saying, "I'll return it to you, but you have to listen to me carefully. First of all, from now on, as long as you're in class, you can't take your phone out. If I catch you doing it again, you'll never get it back." Then she added, "Second, from now on, you have to be on your best behavior in school. If you get in any more trouble, I'll have no problem having the police handle it. Just because you're not as fortunate as your classmates doesn't mean you can steal from them." Kevin didn't say anything. He just entered the fundraising information into his phone and returned to his seat. Professor Murdoch also took out her phone and went to the donation website. Their class had donated close to $2.5 million, which pleased her to no end. "I may not be too enthusiastic about some of this job, but with a little training I'll be able to achieve greater things in the future," Professor Murdoch thought to herself. Suddenly, one of the students shouted, "Quick, take a look at the donation website." This immediately got everyone's attention. They all pulled out their phones to see. There was utter silence in the room. They could all see that someone had just donated $500,000. And the name next to the donation was Kevin. Penny suddenly raised her head to look at Kevin. Why would someone who could afford to donate $500,000 steal a phone? Did I really misunderstand him? Penny wondered. She felt a little guilty. Luther and Lionel almost fell out of their seats. Nobody could believe it, but they had the proof right there. Kevin walked over to Mike and said, "You said I was so poor I had to steal a phone? Then tell me how many phones you could buy for $500,000. He said this loud enough so everyone in the class could clearly hear him. Mike suddenly got flustered. "What is there for you to be proud of when you're just spending your wife's money? Anyway, my father's the one who gave me my money, and I won't get scolded when I get home." Then Mike pulled out his phone and donated $500,000 to the fundraiser. Yesterday at night, he begged his father to give him more money for his expenses. He never knew that the money would be spent to save his reputation. He'd already spent $360,000 for dinner the night before, and now he was donating another $500,000. He hardly had anything left in his account. The students all saw Mike's name pop up on the fundraiser website, and they were really impressed. Mike relished in their praise. He looked at Kevin with a self-satisfied smirk and boasted, "Let's see if you can match that with your wife's money." Kevin's classmates started to whisper to each other. They didn't realize that he'd been spending his wife's money. The Jones family would really be ticked at him for doing that. While they were all processing this new information, some of them noticed that Kevin seemed really calm. But Mike was starting to look very upset. "Wow, Mike, it looks like you're really rich. Are you sure you are in the mood to compete with me?" Kevin shot back. Then he took out his phone and donated $1 million to the fundraiser. Everyone checked their phones and saw that Kevin had just donated $1 million more. They couldn't believe their eyes, and some of them started to get a very different opinion of Kevin. "Did this guy really steal his wife's card?" Mike gulped. He didn't have enough money left in his account to compete with Kevin. "Aren't you going to match my donation, Mike? Remember, it's for the disaster victims." Kevin teased him as he added another $500,000. The room fell quiet again. They all looked at Mike to see what he was going to do, but it was obvious that he was very upset. Mike opened his mouth to speak, but he choked on his words. His father had already told him not to ask him for any more money until next year. If he called him again today, his dad would probably be so mad at him that he'd fly into a rage and come to Chicago to straighten him out in person. That wouldn't go well. How come you haven't made any more donations? Don't you have any money left in your account? Kevin chided him. You were just saying that I'm a poor jerk who had to steal a phone. Do you still think I'm poor? Mike stared at Kevin for a long time, but he couldn't find the words to reply. If he'd known this would happen, he wouldn't have donated so much money. Now he really felt like a fool. He'd been trying to make Kevin look like a putz, but he'd only hurt himself. Mike got so angry that he punched Kevin in the shoulder. Suddenly the class realized that Mike had just been trying to impress them all, even though he really couldn't afford it. I can forgive you for insulting me, but do you expect to get away with hitting me? Kevin growled as he grabbed Mike's wrist with one hand and slapped him hard on the cheek with the other. The blow knocked Mike back several feet and he fell to the floor with a thud. Kevin, how can you do that? Professor Murdoch shouted from the podium. I'm sure you saw what he did, Professor. Mike struck me first and I was just defending myself. Kevin replied frankly. Do the school regulations say that I can't fight back when I'm being bullied? Professor Murdoch was obviously angry, but she knew that Kevin was right. When Kevin donated all of that money to the fundraiser, the professor started to change her mind about him. But after seeing him strike a fellow student, his good deeds didn't matter anymore. Come to my office, Professor Murdoch ordered him. She seemed like she was about to lose control of herself. Kevin wondered what was going on. He could tell that she seemed a little weaker than before. He followed her into her office and stood there quietly. Kevin, private fights are strictly prohibited here. If you dare to strike anyone again, you'll be severely punished, Professor Murdoch informed him. Are you taking Mike's side, Professor? Didn't you see how he was bullying me? Kevin replied casually. Then he asked her, Are you feeling okay? You don't seem as strong today as you usually do. What makes you say that? She asked him as a look of panic flashed in her eyes. She hadn't spoken to anyone about how she'd been feeling. Did you forget what I said at the dinner last night? I told you that there was something strange about the pill Mike gave you and I warned you not to take it. Kevin reminded her as he shook his head. But you told me that you couldn't see anything wrong with it. Are you making fun of me, Kevin? Professor Murdoch changed the subject as she deliberately avoided talking about the pill. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep and my body hasn't had a chance to recover yet. You're lying to yourself, Professor. There's no need to do that with me, Kevin admonished her with a smile. If I'm right, you'll have lost all your progress within 3 days, and you'll never be able to get it back, no matter what you try. Professor Murdoch began to panic, but quickly calmed herself and asked Kevin, Are you trying to scare me? From what she knew about the augmentation pill, these effects Kevin was talking about didn't make any sense. It had taken her a long time to get as far as she had in her training, and it had brought her a lot of recognition and respect. If Kevin was right, she'd lose her position in the school, along with a lot of the connections she'd made with some very powerful people. Since you don't believe me, I don't know what else I can say, Kevin sighed. But please remember what I said, Professor. There are only 3 days left at most. If you change your mind in the next couple of days, just give me a call. I have a way to solve your problem. Then Kevin asked if he had her permission to return to class. When he got back to the room, Merriweather avoided any eye contact with him, but Kevin didn't really care. He sat down in his seat and waited for Professor Murdoch to return. Just when he was about to take out his phone to see if the battery still had a charge, Penny suddenly turned around and put a piece of paper on Kevin's desktop. A few of the students saw this and wondered why on earth she would bother to pass a note to a loser like him. After Kevin got back from Professor Murdoch's office, he sat down in his seat and started to check his phone. Before he could even pull it out, Penny turned around and put a note on his desk. The students who saw this started whispering to each other, wondering what was going on. Kevin didn't care what they thought. He could see the note that said, Sorry, I was wrong about you. This made Kevin feel a little awkward. If he replied that's okay, it would seem that he didn't think that much of himself, but if he said too much, she might think he was full of himself. This isn't going to be easy, Kevin scratched his head and thought to himself. While he was trying to figure out what to say to Penny, his phone started buzzing like crazy in his lap. Kevin took a look and saw that he had a ridiculous number of messages from Gwen Archer. There were texts saying things like, "Why are you asking me about this?" and "Are you angry?" "Please don't be mad at me," one of the messages said. "I promise I won't let my brother fight Dalton again." Kevin was confused about what to do. He just asked Gwen about Dalton in yesterday's class when Professor Murdoch took his phone away, but he never expected Gwen to send him dozens of texts in just one day. After thinking for a while, Kevin replied to her briefly. "If you really want me to teach you to be an apothecary, don't let anyone bother Dalton Steele again. Otherwise, you won't be able to get another power pill from me ever again." Meanwhile, Penny was starting to get very anxious. She'd only written one simple sentence. Why was Kevin taking so long to respond? Finally, Penny couldn't stand the suspense and she turned around to look at Kevin. She was shocked to see that he was playing with his phone with his head down. He hadn't even touched her note. Why was he ignoring her, she wondered. Penny wasn't used to anyone giving her the brush off. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. How could he do this to her when she just offered him an olive branch? But Kevin wasn't aware any of this was going on. He was in the middle of a heated argument with Gwen Archer. "Your brother took the power pill I gave him and then used his force against my best friend. And now you still want me to be your teacher? Is that all you think of me?" Kevin replied angrily. "I didn't have anything to do with it. When Dalton came to our mansion, I hardly said a thing to him. So don't blame me," she explained. Then Gwen begged him anxiously, "Please let me be your student. I'll consider Dalton to be part of my family and ask my brother to get along with the Steele family. We'll even come to an agreement on our conflict with the bar Dalton opened." Kevin grunted and simply replied, "I'll believe it when I see it." Then Kevin put away his phone. Penny's note had been blown onto the floor by a light breeze. While this was going on, Randall Williams was in his New York mansion having coffee with Seth Roundtree. After he'd gotten the call from Randall the evening before, Roundtree had rushed to New York as soon as he could. He'd managed to get there by this morning. "Mr. Williams, by joining the Myriads, you've made a wise decision for your family," Roundtree stated plainly as he put his coffee cup down on the table. "I'll take you tonight to meet with the senior members. That way we'll all be clear about what we can expect from each other in this relationship." "I'd like to talk to you about the herbal meds for my family," Randall asked him reluctantly. As long as his family was joining the Myriads, he wanted them to start making progress as soon as possible. "Don't worry, I have plenty of pills for you. Tonight I'll ask my people to let you have some of the construction pills," Roundtree reassured him. Then he pulled a training manual out of his briefcase and said, "Take this as my gift to your family to commemorate your acceptance into the Myriads." Randall had an unsure look on his face as he took the book. When he saw the title, he got very excited. It was Instruction Manual for Myriads Members, Physical and Cognitive Training. That's right. This is the manual that our organization has developed over the years to give all of our members a physical and mental edge over our competition, Roundtree explained proudly. "I'd only heard rumors about this," Randall exclaimed. "I can't believe I'm holding it in my hands." He was beyond excited. If his family mastered this training, they wouldn't have to answer to anyone. "There's a lot of valuable information in there. Some of it we developed on our own. Other things have been picked up by infiltrating various groups," Roundtree practically whispered as though he were afraid of someone hearing him admit it. "This is a truly generous gift," Randall said gratefully. "Look how happy you are. But don't worry. I can guarantee you that this is only the beginning. Once you join us, as long as you sincerely contribute to the organization, there will be more good things in store for you than you can ever imagine," Roundtree boasted as he leaned back in his chair. Then he said more soberly, but there are other groups that are unwilling to share. Does that sound right to you?"
"What you're saying makes sense,"
Randall replied distractedly. But at the moment, he couldn't take his eyes off the manual that Roundtree had given him. "Okay, I still have some business to attend to. Make sure that your family gets started right away. The construction pills will be delivered by 10 o'clock tonight at the latest," Roundtree assured him. Then he said, "I have to get going." Roundtree closed up his briefcase and headed out the door, leaving Randall to flip enthusiastically through the book. At the School for the Healing Arts, they included a physical education class in the curriculum. It looked a lot like what you might find at any ordinary college. The big difference was that their instructors in basic martial arts techniques had highly specialized training, and the class itself was grueling. In a 2-hour class, they only rested for a few minutes at a time. Kevin was assigned to Group 24, which was training close to Phoebe Anderson and Sherwin Blair, who were in Group 25. Kevin had already moved way beyond the basic moves that were being demonstrated in the class, so he found a shady spot and lay down on the ground where he could watch the rest of the students practice. Suddenly, Lily walked up to him holding 2 bottles of water. She smiled and offered one to Kevin. "Sweetie, do you want some water?" Kevin nodded and returned her smile. He popped Lily's bottle open and handed it back to her. Lily sat down right next to Kevin and put her head on his shoulder. A few of the men in the class who were interested in Lily were very jealous of Kevin when they saw this.
"Hey, isn't that Lily? Who's that guy she's sitting with?" one of them asked.
"You don't know who that is? I thought everyone had heard of him. He's Lily's trashy husband," another student explained to him.
"Didn't you say their marriage was on the rocks? They definitely aren't acting like it," he replied.
Kevin could hear their discussions and he started to smile. He'd also felt that Lily had become more and more affectionate lately. Just then, another beautiful woman walked over to Kevin. Phoebe Anderson handed Kevin a bottle of water and gave him a pleasant smile. "You must be thirsty, Kevin," she remarked as she looked him in the eyes and completely ignored Lily. "I'm very flattered, Miss Anderson," Kevin teased her. "Don't forget that I still owe you a meal. When are you free?" she asked him. She clearly remembered that their dinner had been interrupted by Officer Emmett. Phoebe still hadn't properly thanked him for the Dream Lover necklace. Whenever Phoebe had nothing to do, she would start thinking about Kevin. That's why she'd brought along an antique Italian hairpin with her, so she'd have an excuse to spend some time with him. "I've got tons of free time. Just say when," Kevin answered playfully. "We can figure that out later. But first, I wonder if you can take a look at this Italian hairpin," Phoebe asked as she handed it to Kevin. She could feel Lily's eyes on her. But Phoebe was smart. She knew that she needed a good excuse to spend some time with Kevin, and her plan seemed to work. When Lily saw that Phoebe had an actual business-related question for Kevin, she stopped giving her the evil eye. But she still kept a watchful eye on the two of them. "That's a very nice piece," Kevin said as he turned the hairpin over in his hand. "It's genuine onyx and gold. The cameo looks like a member of the Italian royal family. My conservative estimate is $90,000. Their conversation started to draw some stares from the other students who were taking their break. Why was this loser so popular? If Lily and Kevin had such a great thing going, what was Phoebe Anderson trying to do? They just couldn't figure it out. Then one of the rich kids walked over and said very loudly,
"You'd better not get involved with Kevin. Did you know he stole Penny Sutherland's phone at the Whistler Hotel last night? He was exposed in front of the entire class. I wouldn't let him near any of your expensive antiques."
"You must be joking," Phoebe laughed. Then she added very seriously, "He's our antique shop's chief appraiser." The man's jaw dropped when she said that. He turned around and walked away without saying another word. The cameo has incredible detail, but I think that the pin itself was probably repaired in the late 1700s, Kevin added thoughtfully. "Wow, you really know your stuff. Even my father didn't know that much about it, but you could tell all that with just a glance?" Phoebe gushed. Her eyes were almost shining with admiration. "I never knew my husband was so skilled," Lily commented. She emphasized the word husband to send a message to Phoebe. Phoebe felt some disappointment when she heard Lily say that. I wish I'd met Kevin first, Phoebe thought to herself. Kevin sensed the tension. Just as he was about to say something to change the subject, he heard a firm voice telling him to have some more water. It sounded more like a command than a friendly request. The three of them turned around at the same time to see who it was. Kevin gulped nervously when he saw Penny standing there looking down at him. The students who had been watching Kevin so enviously for the past few minutes couldn't take it anymore.
What the hell is this? Now Penny's giving Kevin water too? One of them commented.
What's he got that I don't? Another one said. They had no idea what these three women saw in the guy. It was bad enough that Lily and Phoebe were fawning over Kevin, but now Penny was joining in. What's this about, Penny? Kevin asked her inquisitively. He couldn't figure out what she wanted from him. I just wanted to say that I was wrong about you, Kevin. Take this bottle of water as a peace offering, Penny said coolly. No one knew just how conflicted Penny was feeling as she did this. She was from a very important family and was usually very reserved. It was a big deal for her to offer something to a man that lots of people in the school thought was such a loser. But she also knew that what had happened that morning had been her fault. She'd treated Kevin like a thief and almost had him thrown out of the school when he'd only been trying to help her. On top of that, when Penny passed that note to Kevin and he didn't reply, she couldn't think of any other way to make it up to him. Don't worry about it, Penny. It was a simple misunderstanding, Kevin said graciously. He could feel all the eyes on him, and it didn't feel too good. I always try to deal with people fairly, she explained. How about if I treat you to dinner sometime? The more nonchalant Kevin acted, the more Penny felt sorry for him. She didn't say it very loud, but everyone heard her invitation very clearly. The guys who had a crush on Penny just couldn't stand it. What the heck did she see in him? Kevin was starting to make a lot of enemies in his class without even trying. Lily and Phoebe were also a little wary of her. Was Penny an old friend of Kevin's? Why was she inviting him to dinner? Phoebe was starting to feel very uneasy. She was already in competition with Lily, and now there was someone new she had to deal with. But Lily was getting even more nervous. She knew exactly who Penny was. She was from the most important family in the city, and she was also very attractive. Lily was afraid that Penny might try to steal Kevin from her. Right then, Lily promised herself not to let anyone take her husband away from her, and it was up to her to do something about it.